didn't have weapons of mass destruction. I find that very hard to believe. So I haven't said it, but most people have said it across the spectrum. If he does reveal it, that will show that the commentators across the spectrum, including the CIA, were mistaken. I don't expect him to, but it's on another dimension. As for his capture, that's an occasion for rejoicing on the part of people who have condemned his crimes and atrocities throughout the period of his bloody rule, and have also condemned the decisive support for Saddam Hussein right through the period of his worst atrocities by the people who are now running Washington and by the United Kingdom. So, for example, the press today correctly points out that he could be brought to trial for genocide because of his gassing and massacres of Kurds in 1988 and his crushing of the rebellion that might well have overthrown him in 1991. What I haven't seen pointed out, and what should be pointed out by any honest commentator, is that those genocidal crimes were carried out with the decisive support of the force of the government that now captured him and is now in office. And it had nothing to do with the war with Iran. The war with Iran was over. It's just that the people in power in Washington and in London didn't care. In fact, they explained why they were continuing supporting. Explained it. It's not secret. George Bush, #1, explained, and his administration explained, that they would continue to provide aid to Saddam Hussein, including the potential for the technology that could be used and was used for weapons of mass destruction. They would do so because of their responsibility to support U.S. exporters, and because supporting Saddam would improve the stability and the human rights situation of the region. When the Bush administration, that's pretty much the people now back in office, supported Saddam Hussein's crushing of the rebellion that might have overthrown him, it was explained. So, for example, the main Middle East correspondent of the New York Times, Alan Cowell, pointed out accurately that Bush, and as well as London, as the United Kingdom, was supporting, effectively authorizing his crushing of the rebellion because there was an overwhelming consensus that Saddam offered better hope for the stability of Iraq than did the people who were trying to overthrow him. So, in other words, Washington and London preferred Saddam to the rebels who were trying to overthrow him. So, yes, these are the charges of genocide are legitimate, and those who shared responsibility for them should be in the dock if there's a fair trial.
Now, you sort of, I'll say you, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you frame this in sort of a larger context, right? Stretching through time, that Iraq isn't an isolated incident. And yet, for some people who've written in, it very much is. One person writes in, "You pile up all of these facts as if anyone cares. No one cares. No one really buys the propaganda either way. The focus is on a bottom line. Is the bad guy getting his due? Yes, then good. Does this make the Arab world need to clean up its act? Then good, and that's the end." Someone else writes, "U.S. history doesn't negate good work. Intellectual consistency is not required," he says.
No, the question of what is required is an effort to understand ourselves. It's the same people, same institutions. They're carrying out the same kind of actions. They're supporting the same kinds of gangsters and monsters who they supported in the past. So there's no basic difference between Saddam Hussein and Karimov in Uzbekistan, one of the current favorites, who boils his opponents to death. It's his favorite method. Or Obiang in Equatorial Africa is one of the worst gangsters and happens to be sitting on a pool of oil, so he's feted in the White House. In fact, there isn't the slightest indication of any change in policy. So if we want to understand ourselves and the world, we do pay attention to what happened. I mean, suppose that Saddam Hussein is brought to trial, and he says, and he's charged, as he should be, with the horrifying crimes that I just mentioned. Would it be appropriate for him to say, well, that's all in the past. Who cares? I mean, nobody cares about what happened in the past. What happens is today. From now on, I'm going to be a good guy. So let me off and let me run the country. I mean, if he were to say that, we wouldn't even bother laughing. Therefore, why are we willing to allow our own leaders and ourselves to say the same thing and not collapse in ridicule?
That leads me to a question about who you're pointing the finger at. As I'm sure you can imagine, the reader mailbox comes in with a lot of questions about why do you hate America, and if you hate America so much, why don't you leave, and those kind of things. And I seem to recall asking you that last time you were here, and understanding that it's not about hating America. But can you clarify who it is we're talking about? Is this a Bush administration thing? Are Americans not paying attention?
First of all, Americans don't support these policies.
Uh-huh.
The idea of hating America is a very interesting one. It's standard totalitarian doctrine. So, under the Soviet Union, before it collapsed, critics of the government's policies and its institutions, people like Sakharov and Václav Havel and others, they were bitterly condemned because they hated Russia and they hated the Soviet Union. They were anti-Soviet. That's totalitarianism. Totalitarian ideals are that you identify state policy and the dominant institutions. You identify them with the country, the society, and the people. For anyone who has a minimal commitment to democracy and justice, this is ludicrous. I mean, you don't hate the country if you oppose the policies of its leadership. Actually, that idea is drawn from the lexicon of totalitarianism, but it actually goes all the way back to the Bible. King Ahab, who was the epitome of evil in the Bible, condemned the prophet Elijah as someone who hates Israel, disturbing Israel. Why? Because Elijah was criticizing the policies of the king and was calling for justice and decency. And from the point of view of King Ahab, that's hating Israel. And from the point of view of his successors, those who also criticize policy and call for alternatives and call for justice, hate the country. They should ask themselves whether these are the pages of history on which they choose to find themselves.
Incidentally, will you be endorsing a candidate for 2004? Presidential candidate, I mean?
Well, I've never endorsed a candidate in the past, and I don't.
Just
I'm
wondering.
not an institution. I don't issue press releases or endorsements. I have my choices, like everyone else.
Any that you care to share?
Not really. I mean,
Okay,
I will
that's fine.
vote. I will
That's your
vote for
business.
just about anyone, to tell you the truth, who would rid the country of an extremist clique that has taken control and is is an enormous threat to the country and the world. That's the little clique around Bush. I think they're very dangerous, and I think I agree with. This is not an issue of left and right or conservative and liberal, incidentally. Across a substantial spectrum, including traditional conservatives, they are regarded as extremely dangerous. Right. And I think we would do well to be rid of them. As to the alternatives, there's a great deal to say, and no time to say it.
Do you? There's a bit in your book about